Hello friends, thank you for joining me for my video blog. It's been a while since I've posted anything, but I just wanted to take this time and give a post-election thoughts, analysis, so to speak, from a spiritual standpoint. And I wanted to kind of wait a little while for the dust to settle after the election before I shared my personal insights and my prophetic perspective. Now, I want to preface all of this in saying a lot of this is my opinion. Some of it is my prophetic insight. So some I will be sharing will be what I've seen in the spirit, and some will be just how I feel in the natural. I will try to distinguish between the two. But even know that all of us, we see in part and we prophesy in part. And so you must pray into these things that I do share. So that being said, our president, President Barack Obama, has been reelected to a second term as President of the United States, as all of us, well know, unless we're underneath a rock. Now, many Christians were divided over this election. There were those who took a stand for biblical values and said, we will not vote for a president who supports the shedding of innocent blood, but we will only vote for those who are committed to life, who are committed to defending the innocent both before birth and after birth. And many of those were turned out and voted for Governor Romney. I was one of them because I was satisfied that he was a pro-life candidate. And I realized there are larger issues, and a lot of them come down to just political philosophy of how we look at someone, how we look at the role of government, and many people made other decisions. But I believe a nation and we as Christians are held responsible for who we vote for. And who we vote for makes a statement in the spiritual realm. And the Lord gives us freedom to choose. And the church on a whole voted for Obama. The church in America on a whole is responsible for re-electing President Obama. If the church turned out and supported Romney, he would have been overwhelmingly elected by a landslide. The silent majority, as some analysts have called it, really is the evangelical vote. Now, that being said, I really don't want to argue these issues, but I do believe that two issues really determine the blessing of a nation. And that is how we look after those who have no voice, such as the unborn. And second, how do we treat the nation of Israel? And since the election, President Obama has stood up for Israel in this latest attack from Gaza. And for that, I applaud him. And I believe that our continued blessing as a nation, our continued economic blessing, is because of our support with the nation of Israel. And that as long as we continue to support Israel, our nation will continue to walk in this blessing. But there is a curse over this nation as well. And God has withheld his hand of judgment against our nation for the last 39 years. And this January will be the 40th year since Roe v. Wade. We have slaughtered 1 out of 3 upon the altar of abortion. 1 out of 3 of my generation never saw the light of day. And if you don't think that God will stand idly by and ignore the cries of the innocent, we are deluding ourselves. Now, there are some people who say that it was God who put Obama into the White House. For it says in the Bible that God raises up kings and brings them down. And yes, that is true. God is sovereign, and God's hand is over all. But God honors the heart of the nation. God honors the decisions of a people, whether they're made for righteousness or evil. And just as in the days of Saul, when the Israelites cried out for a king, and the Lord gave him Saul. Saul was not his first choice. It was not God's first choice to give them a king. But God honored their request and gave them a king. And we've seen evil kings, evil rulers over the nation of Israel. And some of those, yes, God allowed them to rise up, but he also brought them down. And at the same time, we can't use our excuse, well, God appointed Obama. Yes, he did select Obama before the foundations of the world. And I'm going to get into President Obama's destiny as a leader later. But it was not God's choice to bring Obama into the White House. It was God's choice. It's God's heart to have a man of righteousness who upholds justice in the White House. And the church did not elect a man or woman of righteousness, but we elected a man who is the most pro-abortion president in history. And that is based on his voting record as senator and state senator in Illinois. That is not conjecture, that is not opinion, but his voting record speaks for itself. He is the most pro-choice president we have ever had. And yes, there are things that I love about him. But that alone is enough for me to not be able to vote for a man. And if the church truly rises up and say, we will not vote for anyone who supports the spilling of innocent blood, we will see the overturning of Roe v. Wade like that. We will see a deluge, we will see a tsunami of pro-life candidates take the White House, take Congress, take Senate, take the state legislatures across this land. That is what we need to be contending for as the church. That is what we need to be fighting for as a contending house of prayer in this land. That God would raise up men and women of righteousness. That he would raise up Daniels and Esthers to take the mountain of government. Earlier this year, a couple months ago, I prophesied that God is raising up the spirit of Daniel. And many of these Daniels are not going to be Daniels, but they're going to be Danielas. For God is raising up the spirit of Daniel, and he's placing it upon a company of women who will rise up and who will take a stand in the halls of government, and that they will speak to the leaders of our nation, that they will be as Daniel, who had favor before pagan kings. And so we need to pray for those who have had the Holy Spirit fill them, that they would be used as mouthpieces like Daniel and Esther. But we also need to pray for those who do not know the Lord, that they would be as Cyrus, king of Persia, who the Lord called his anointed, even though he was a pagan king. And the Lord's Spirit and his hand was upon Cyrus, and he used Cyrus to restore the Jewish people to Israel. And so we need to continue to pray for the turning of our nation. We need to continue to pray that the Lord would raise up men and women of righteousness in our nation. That he would turn our nation back to him. 2 Chronicles says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray, I will hear their cry and restore their land. Our nation is in trouble, my friends. Our nation is headed to economic destruction if something is not done. Our nation is in the grip of the largest genocide the world has ever seen, and it's a silent genocide. We look back at our forefathers who allowed slavery to survive in this nation. And we say, why did not the church stand up? The church accepted it. Pastors defended it from the pulpit as a God-ordained institution. During the times of segregation, again, the church stood for it, and they defended why society needed to keep the black race in their place. That was their mindset. That's not mine. That's an evil mindset. But that's how they viewed it. Churches were segregated, where they would not allow a black man to come in and worship. Blacks were lynched and beaten for visiting a white church. Whites were beaten for daring to step into a black church. There are entire denominations now known as African American denominations, because those people, those pastors, were forced to start their own denominations during the times of segregation, during the times of slavery. And we wonder why those were allowed to stand. And we criticize past generations for not having courage. And yet, when did segregation end? When black and white pastors joined hands and made their presence known in the streets of our nation and said, we will not rest until we see the black race, until we see the African American people take their place as equal brothers. When we saw people like Billy Graham who desegregated his crusades and was greatly criticized for it. What we need is the church to rise up in one accord and say, we will lay aside our differences, but we will not vote for anyone who does not support the ending of abortion. If you support abortion, we cannot vote for you. If we saw that, we would see an ending to abortion. If we no longer said, well, maybe he supports the programs we like. We like his stance on government. We like what he stands for on these other issues. I'm not asking you to be a one-issue voter. But one issue trumps them all. One issue must be a deal breaker. It was the church who voted in Hitler and Nazi Germany. It was a predominant Christian nation. My grandmother was a youth during the Nazi regime, and she tells the story well, how the church was deceived, how the church put an economic solution above righteousness. Hitler had already written Mein Kampf. His hatred against the Jews were well known. His anti-Semitic views were known long before he was elected. But the church ignored it for political expediency, for economic stability, for Hitler had a plan to bring Germany back to greatness. And he did. But at what price? And so when we decide who to vote for, at what price are we willing to take? And I am saying, no more for the blood of tens of millions of innocent babies. 1 out of 3 cries out for justice. And so I say to you, my brothers and sisters, yes, the Lord allowed President Obama to be reelected because the church spoke. The church spoke. And now we must pray. And in this next portion, I'm going to pray into this, and I'm going to show you how we can pray in specifically for President Obama. But our nation is at a crossroads. The Lord spoke to me some time ago and said the decisions made in 2013 are going to set into motion the future of Roe v. Wade. We are at a Kairos time. And we are stepping into the Kairos time of 2013 when the future of abortion will be decided once and for all in this nation. What decision are we going to make? So until next time, my brothers and sisters, may God bless you richly. I know I've gone on a little bit long, but I just pray that the Lord will bless you and speak to you about these matters.